All right, welcome everybody. I'm excited to have a chance to be with you here today. I hope we get a chance to have some fun and play for the next hour and a quarter, whatever it's going to be. I'm used to working with children having a ratio of, many more women than men, but I'm really the only guy in the room. Where's a male teacher here? Somebody.
We have them.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
You didn't let him out of the closet. He's in a meeting. He's done. All right. Well, we're going to have some fun here either way. So to do that and to try to keep me on track, we're going to set this timer here for the next hour. And we'll go a little bit past that. That's all the further that goes. So I'll set this for an hour too. And that'll help keep us on track. Where I'm going to introduce to you or discuss with you ADHD and executive functions and the challenges that you may be facing with children in your elementary school classrooms in particular. Now, those of you who have been to some of my workshops before know that I like to start this way, which is to start with you actually presenting and me being the audience, and then we'll play with it throughout. And that is specifically, if you're stuck with me for the next hour at the end of your school day here, what's going to make it worth your while? Seriously. I'd like to together set our intentions for how we can get the most out of this next hour for you and make it worth your while. So towards that end, I'd like to ask you to share a little bit with what your main challenges are with students with ADHD currently. We want to get past maybe some of the basic introductory, programs that maybe you've had a half dozen times or so, and really get to the meat of it. I really promised a very interactive, hands-on, practical kind of workshop for you this afternoon. So I want to be able to deliver that, and towards that end I need to know, what are you dealing with currently? What are your questions, your challenges, your frustrations with some of these kiddos today? So yes.
I'm the learning support teacher here at Easterly, and in fact it just came up today, the question that had nothing to do with ADHD necessarily, but when is a student really showing characteristics of a disability like or ADHD, and when has he learned it well enough just to take a little bit of use of it so that he gets out of work, or has given up because it's so hard not to let the disability take over his actions, so that you really are dealing with the child's disability when you should be and not his behavior. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Yes. And, I mean, the specific thing we were wondering about with this student was whether or not maybe there even needs to be a medication change, because we don't know, and we don't know what the ramifications of the medications are for him. What's too much, what's not enough.
Okay. Okay, so what do we do with individuals who have a diagnosed disability, such as ADHD or perhaps another one? And when is it, what do we do with the disability versus other aspects of that personality? And what's important to recognize right off the bat is that individuals with ADHD also have many other personality characteristics, just like every single one of us in this room. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. So I'll actually use that in my fuller answer with you a little bit later, which is I almost don't care. Okay? A lot of times we kind of tiptoe around this, and there are good reasons to think thoughtfully about the question. I don't mean like it's not a good question, but sometimes I think we get so hung up on that. Oh, well, you can't discipline him for his disability, and I know there are state regs and things we have to operate within reasonably, but reasonably is the answer. No, we do need to deal with the child's disability and their ability, and we do need to discipline them. Now we need to do it smarter, not harder, more effectively instead of less effectively, and that's what we'll play with today, absolutely. And I have a few specific tools for your teacher toolkit today to help you with that. But it's a great and common challenging question that we face. And another one certainly is the question about medications. I will share with you some of that if that's of concern to the group at large, and give my 2 cents worth, with the disclaimer that I am not a medical doctor and an MD. I'm a PhD, so I'm not licensed. Yay, thank you. I was earlier saying, where are the men? All right, good. There you go, there you go. All right, so yes, what else? What are your other challenges that you hope to get out of this time? Yes?
Children who do have a diagnosis of ADHD and they're not on any medication.
Yeah?
I think it's easier to help the ones with the hyperactivity, but what can we as classroom teachers do when they don't pay attention and they're not on medication? What are some practical strategies that we can do other than always, you know, being right there or having their peer be right there so we're not constantly with that student?
You mean you have other things to do?
To a couple anyhow.
How to deal with distractibility, and I'm going to again suggest whether they're on their medication or not, whether we think it's the right meds or not. Why? Because what do you have control over? Not that. Not that. What you have is a kid in the room who either is or isn't paying attention, whether he is or isn't on meds, is or isn't diagnosed with ADHD. See, I want to get functional. I want to get real with you and say, look, what behavior is working, what's not working, how do we help it work better? Right? So it may well be, and that child, let's pretend that child does have ADHD and responds well to his medication, and on days that he doesn't take his medication, there's a clear difference. What do we say to the kid, and the kid goes, well, I'm sorry, I can't pay attention. I can't do that worksheet because I didn't take my pill this morning. Oh, yes, you can. You know, now we have to figure out how. So we can acknowledge and go, okay, I understand it's harder for you to focus without your medicine than with it. So today we have to figure out how you're going to focus as best you can without your medicine. Or he's not on the right dosage, and or we don't know that. That's the physician's job, not ours. So either way, we'll come back to how do we deal with that, and then some practical tools either way without me getting too carried away on that soapbox of, all right, the distractibility and attention factor, how do we work with that? I'll be glad to try to offer some suggestions.
I'm interested in family. I teach second grade, and so a lot of times we're just starting to maybe notice that there's a possibility that this child has ADHD, and it's not just maturity. And parents sometimes approach us asking us questions. I don't want to be the doctor, I don't want to diagnose, but I'm wondering if there's some things that we can suggest to parents to start looking at possibilities to help their child lead a more structured life or be more successful in school.
Great.
With perhaps touching on the possibility of
Great. So how to help families, parents in particular, manage a child who's highly distractible, impulsive, whether he does or doesn't meet threshold for the diagnosis. How to help parents manage, what are tools for them, inattention and impulsivity as well. And how to perhaps understand this ADHD question and where to go for more help with it, or
yeah, exactly.
what to do with it, either way. Okay, great. And I have some resources to offer you, and again, some practical tips, some books, some resources, and my business card. Okay. All right, what else? Great.
I think what most concerns me is, I mean, in general, I would like to just understand a little bit more about the qualities and characteristics and things. I think that, you know, a lot of us think all the time about, like, okay, well, I'm going to have to deal with this child in my classroom, this is so hard for me. But I think a lot about what damage I'm doing to a child when I talk to him or her too much, when I'm being ineffective in the ways that I'm redirecting a child, and then I feel like I'm micromanaging them, or I'm sitting on them all the time, or, you know, so like how is it that I as a teacher can get some more effective results from a child while at the same time trying to minimize, or I don't know, just make more effective my communication with them, so that I don't, so they aren't sort of, their spirit isn't being squished by the fact that I'm
Wonderful.
attending to them all the time, overly.
We want to enhance, not squish their spirit. All right. Absolutely. But sure, no. I really appreciate your sensitivity to the question. You're caring enough about a student to wonder, am I doing harm, or in what way? How can I, again, encourage and empower that student with whatever abilities and disabilities they have to, you know, without getting corny, be the best that they can be. That's what every one of us is in our jobs because we care about kids, right? And so what are the challenges with kids who have particular difficulties or differences that are significant enough that it impairs their daily functioning? Because you don't get this diagnosis if you don't have some of these characteristics to the degree that it impairs your functioning. That's part of the diagnostic criteria. So by definition, something's not working for them. How do we help empower them without, and often it includes a lot of, yes, we're going to talk about structuring, what's helpful structuring and what's micromanaging. And, you know, we'll talk about positive prompts versus negative nagging. You go, oh yeah, I know that, but then we'll tape record you next week. And we'll see how many times you're remembering to use positive prompts instead of negative nagging when it's the 100th time that day that I just told you to do that. But you never do that. Yes?
I sometimes find it hard to know where the line is between enabling and helping them to manage themselves.
Good. And it's along the same line. So I like this idea. I'm going to keep using this. Enable versus empower, let's call it. And how is what we're doing either one? I like it. Good. Okay, what else? A couple more and then we'll be here till midnight. Yes?
I think mine will probably be answered as this all answered, but I teach kindergarten, so I often will hear, geez, they have ADHD, you know, and a lot of it has to do with maturity, but at what point do you say, okay, it's no longer a maturity issue, there needs to be a diagnosis, or are there red flags that kind of lead you away from, it's just a matter of maturing and now there's a real disability?
Right. Good. What else? And we have K through 5 here, right? All right. How many of you have been to a previous workshop or training of any kind on ADHD? About a third to a half. Okay, all right. Trying to figure out what level to dive in here. I have a 10-page handout for you. We are not going to cover every slide. Disclaimer immediately, it's a reference material for you. And our goal isn't for me to read to you everything that you can read yourself. But it really, I hope to highlight for you some of the main points, especially vis-a-vis your expressed concerns here. So let's dive in and see what we can do to address some of these. And towards the end, I'll flip back here and make sure if I haven't answered some of these questions that I do so very directly. Okay, fair enough? All right, great. With that in mind, let's start with this. What's that?
Your brain.
That's your brain, right. That's your brain on drugs, not in a frying pan. Those people remember those commercials. Okay. And we have different parts of the brain here that we can work with. And very quickly, here's some of the main parts that we'll be concerned about. All right. Any questions? All perfectly clear. Notice my high-tech presentation.
Turning the stand just like 2 inches this direction.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the folks over there
There you go. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Is that all right for you guys?
That's the working.
Does
So
that
you
work?
can go back a little bit. I mean, we can.
Yeah.
No, we're fine. Okay.
All right, good. Okay. All animal behavior is some combination of sensory input going into the brain. Through our senses, we see, we hear, different stimuli in our environment comes into us, and the information comes into our brain and gets sent up to the frontal lobes of the brain up here, known as the executive suite or executive control center of the brain, where that information is sent up here, and but it is sent up through the emotional part of the brain in the middle here, known as the limbic system, does some gatekeeping to say, are things safe and secure enough that I can send this information up to the thinking control center brain, or do I need to respond just automatically and instinctually? So for certain animals, all animals except humans, and we're debating about dolphins and our primate apes cousins, we have the most developed frontal lobes of any animal. Without these frontal lobes, animal behavior is sensory input, immediate, reflexive, or what we call instinctual motor output, right? And what's different about us is this, as I was starting to say, this information that comes up, gets passed up to the frontal part of the brain where we have a pause button, and in a nanosecond we can consider the input coming in, consider the past memories, anticipate future consequences, virtually imagine what might happen if I responded this way or if I responded that way. Choose, hopefully, the most ideal adaptive behavior choice. Release the, you see where there's going to be some breakdowns here. You already know where this story's going here. Release the pause button and then send the command out to pay attention and sit still and eyes on paper, and out comes the motor output to do that. And we have this nice, well-regulated student when the frontal lobes and the more primitive parts of the brain and the emotional parts of the brain in the middle are all working in concert as they should. When we think about executive functions of the brain, we're really talking, as I said, about the control center of the brain, interesting Freudian slip, brain, that are responsible for planning and organizing, as I said, considering what would happen if I did this or that. Then implementing the behavior and self-monitoring the behavior, paying attention to how I'm doing, making corrective feedbacks to myself along the way, being aware of what I'm actually doing while I'm doing it. Anyone know what we call that in neuropsych these days? Working memory, right? Working memory is responsible for keeping track of what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Okay? And this is another type of executive function. So planning and organizing, working memory, self-monitoring and paying attention and being responsible, and adapting, being able to first persist towards a goal. Persist and stay on track and internally direct my behavior, absent external stimulation or reinforcers or bells and whistles, being able to externally direct my behavior towards a goal further down the road and persist with that behavior even when it's not fun. What we call generically willpower or self-control or drive. And being able to persist when that's most adaptive and to be flexible and shift gears, i.e. transition in a timely fashion when it's time to do so. And so it's all these self-regulatory commands that are happening and are coming out of the frontal lobes, directing then the behavioral or motor output that comes out of an individual. The first thing we need to understand is that as human beings we are wired to have these self-control, self-regulatory systems online. And in an ideal world, when everything's working very well, they are online, and it does work that way. But as is the case with any human condition, we have individual differences that some individuals can have strengths in these areas or weaknesses, obviously. And individuals with ADHD have some weaknesses in these areas. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about executive functions in general, and then talk about the ADHD examples of it in particular. And then talk about what do we do with that, okay? What do we do with that? Because the first way to be most empowered and able to empower our students with these challenges is to have an empathic understanding of what is going on first. And when we can actually understand what's going on, and by the way, answering some of your questions, right, I believe we need to be teaching and empowering our parents and our students themselves to understand their brains and understand their minds. So, you know, this brain is this big mysterious, it's the last organ that we kind of feel we can really talk about. And it is a time of very exciting, exploding research, and with the technology and our ability to monitor functional MRIs and other things, brain scans of what parts of the brain are lighting up and activating and responding to different stimuli, and how they're, what parts of the brain are working and not for different individuals. It's very exciting. So we have kids in health class, study the lungs and the heart and the stomach and everything, but historically kind of stay away from the brain. But more and more we need to teach these kids and all our kids how to understand how the mind works, and then empower them to be able to, where they have weaknesses, do workarounds, and where they have strengths, obviously apply them, which to any of your teaching strategies. So let's see how we can do that with ADHD. Okay, executive functioning are those mental processes we use for sustaining problem solving towards a goal. I'm now going to start hopping through some of your slides here. So we're on page 2, I guess. the next page of your handout besides the cover sheet. Right? And you see a little bit more detailed brain sketch than what I drew here. But I'm not going to dwell on this and not get to the practical stuff. So that's why I'm choosing to keep it. Unless anyone has a question about the basic idea. Right? Basic idea makes sense. Good enough, right? Okay. If not, please do speak up at any time. Answer questions. All right. And the ability to self-regulate is key. And what happens, what's really cool in normal child development is we look at the way we learn to self-regulate and guide our behavior is the development of, and people debate 5, 6, 7 different specific executive functions. I have a slide here about the 6 main types of internal actions, or your ability to self-direct and direct your own behavior. The first is to be able to inhibit your impulses. If you're going to pay attention, remember I said there was like a pause button for a nanosecond where you stop and consider all these things? Well, if that pause button isn't working, if you actually can't stop and inhibit your natural reflexive behavior, then you're going to be naturally reflexively behaving all over the place all the time. You probably don't know any kids like that, but if the brakes aren't working, then it's hard to do all the other things. So inhibiting your automatic reactions from your autonomic nervous system down here, being able to inhibit that to get up to do the reflecting is key. When you're able to inhibit, and we'll talk about ways to help kids with that deficit here shortly. When you're able to do that, then are you again able to pay attention to yourself, as I mentioned, self-monitor? Are you able to see to yourself? And we'll talk about the visualization that's most helpful in, again, normal development and kids who have this disability. Are you able to talk to yourself in a constructive way? And that comes online as well. And related to those then are motivating yourself and being able to play with yourself, which is the basis for creativity and problem solving. So we'll take a look at this. The idea that this frontal lobe evolved in human beings is because it was advantageous if we were able to pause and again think about the consequences of our behavior in the future, not in real time react, but pause and reflect and have this override an immediate reaction and strategize about how to work around oncoming saber-toothed tiger or whatever the case may be. It increased the chances for survival of the species. And so that evolved over time, allowing not just the reflexive fight or flight kind of responses, but conscious control over our thoughts again. Think about kiddos and their development. They go, what controls their behavior? Who and what controls their behavior? They move from others, adults mostly controlling their behavior, to internally themselves controlling their behavior, to things in their physical environment controlling their behavior, to their mental processes guiding their behavior. From being present and just reacting and spontaneously to the here and now, to anticipated future idea. Again, we're going to talk a lot about this concept of time today. And you're going to think of ADHD in a whole new way, I think, by the time you leave here today, and its relationship to time. And also gratification. We move from immediate gratification with young children to delayed gratification, right? As we grow older, that's how we try to socialize our kids. And that's why some of these kids who have deficits in this area are so challenging for you, and what do we do with them, okay? Now, it's kind of funny because I spend a lot of time, some of us, I spend a lot of time trying to taking my yoga classes and my mindfulness meditation classes and being more in the present moment and just spontaneous and aware and stop worrying about the future so much and some of those things. And these kids have it in spades, right? Like we basically celebrate our kindergartners for their spontaneity and the joyfulness that they can bring, except for, if they're doing it, in 5th grade still when they're supposed to be, on task. And then it's off task. It's creativity for a 3-year-old, and it's off task in a 13-year-old. Right? But there are these differences in what the environment demands of our students, and so how do we help them adapt and grow when they may have difficulties and things. All right. I'm going to skip over some of these so I'm not being repetitive or too much in detail. Self-restraint comes online in the first few years of life and doesn't fully engage until 10 or 12 years of age. And that's the inhibition, the ability to inhibit your impulses. That part of the brain the inhibition system doesn't fully develop up here until about 12 years old. So it makes sense, as you know, in elementary school, a lot of kids are disinhibited and you're dealing with it all the time. we can expect that they won't have kind of full abilities to control themselves until at least 12, and by then they're 12. And then we go into my middle school talk, it's a totally different story. The ability, again, to provide self-awareness and self-monitoring, I've mentioned that. Let me move on. I want to talk about this self-seeing, this ability of nonverbal working memory, of being able to think and imagine sequences in your mind. Now, what happens if you're able to imagine a scene or scenario in your mind? You're able to picture a sequence of events, right? And when you're able to picture a scene or imagine some things happening in your mind without acting on them immediately, you're picturing this sequence of events. And from this comes our terms of hindsight and foresight. Hindsight, thinking back and learning from, right, our past patterns and things, and using foresight, again, to anticipate the future and think into the future. So it immediately incorporates this sense of time or ability and how to regulate yourself across time in a way that meets the demands of your environment. And these kids, it's not in the typical explanation of what ADHD is, but it's a very strong secondary characteristic. And those of you who have worked with kids like this over the years will know immediately they don't have a sense of time like we're used to. And things that motivate others across time don't motivate these kids. So there's the next slide here called self-seeing and time awareness that I'll ask you to look at in particular, and to kind of circle this and know that in normative development, time horizons that guide your behavior goes from a few minutes in preschoolers. In elementary school, it's a matter of hours. And in middle school, it's 1 or 2 days. Now what I'm saying is, when you tell a kid, pay attention long enough and you'll get that Hershey's Kiss, for preschoolers it needs to be a few minutes. You know, in elementary school maybe it's at the end of the day. You keep staying on task and we'll have some kind of reward at the end of the day. You know, and yet adults are always looking at 9-week marking periods and thinking, well, just stick to it. And in middle school and high school, stick to it, and in 9 weeks you'll get a grade, and that grade will determine your college, and college will determine your life. And these kids, even teenagers, only have a time window that motivates their behavior of 3 to 5 days. They're only planning or caring about things in their world that are only a few days off. They're not typically able to think about and be motivated by and guide their behavior towards a goal that is any longer than these time windows. That's what I'm talking about. And so a lot of times adults who are nagging their teenagers about, well, we got to think about your future, or this or that, or the other thing, and why won't they? They're literally, their frontal lobes are not mature enough yet to do that level of time horizon thinking. And individuals with ADHD are even more limited. And one of the things I use a lot in my clinical work with families nowadays is to think about your child as someone who has time blindness, or what Dr. Russell Barkley calls temporal nearsightedness. Well, think about it. Visual nearsightedness is what? It's when you can see things close in space, but you can't see things far away. Right? And so to be able to see the board from the back of the room, right, what do you need? Eyeglasses, right? So you need some adaptive tool to help you correct your visual sight so you can see far away. People with temporal nearsightedness can only see things near in time to them, are motivated to perform only to those things near in time, i.e. immediate gratification, immediate consequences. They're unable to see or guide and internally drive their behavior forward to things that are far away in time. Yes?
So, a child such as that,
yes,
that when you say to them, if you don't do your homework tonight,
right,
you won't get recess tomorrow,
right,
they aren't even envisioning tonight, much less tomorrow's recess.
May or may not.
And then when they do miss recess tomorrow, they can't look back and say, well, I really should have done my homework last night. I really could have done it instead of having, So.
And you sit there and say, what did I kid? What should you have done last night? I should have done my homework.
They don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, they'll know it then. They'll be able to tell you, oh, I should have done it. But they wouldn't have thought of it in real time and be able to plan and self-guide and self-direct their behavior accordingly. Typically. Now, as I just said, individuals with ADHD have variability too. So you have to try it and see. These are rough guidelines. And we'll talk about individuals with ADHD have about a 30% developmental delay in executive functions. There. That's one of the punchlines. It's on another one of your slides. But that's one of the punchlines. Individuals with ADHD have a 30% developmental delay in most of the executive functions. So we have to see this particular child does recess the next day motivate their behavior the night before or not. It's really an empirical question, which means let's try it and see. But I might start thinking that's probably too far away. Some kids with ADHD, it might still be in their time windows. A lot of kids it won't be. And we'll also still talk about this idea of the pros and cons of recess for work productivity, because movement, as we get to here, is critical for these kids too. And the last thing that's going to help them be more productive for you in school is if they're denied movement opportunities because they weren't productive for you in school. Sorry guys, that's a downward spiral if we're thinking strategically here. Well, that's the only thing that matters to the kid. We have to find leverage, we have to find incentives and motivators. I understand. I'm telling you, when you look at anything you do, consider cost-benefit analysis. Taking recess away to kids to catch up on their back work, or even if it's giving them, but we're giving them extra time. We wrote a 504 plan, we're giving them extra time, and we don't want to take it away from instructional time, so we'll do it here. It doesn't fit with what makes sense, brain sense for these kids. They're going to be less productive, let alone what? More resentful of coming to school and doing what you're bloody well asking them to do. So, so you want to think of several of these factors right now, this time one in particular. Self-speech, self-talk goes from little young kids, preschoolers, talk out loud, think of something, they just say it. We love it. We love the spontaneity of our preschoolers, right? Who doesn't miss their 3-year-olds in the car seat and when you're driving around and out of the mouths of babes, come these wonderful things, right? And at 3 it's cute, and at 13 it's stop that. And again, we socialize it out of our kids. Or at 13, it's like, why won't you talk to me? Please say something. We used to have these lovely car rides together. But that's a different issue. I am also the father of 4 children, 3 of them in college, and a 10-year-old in 4th grade still. So I've been through a lot of these personality stages as well. So I can relate. Okay. I want you to just notice again the guidelines about how these executive functions develop over time. And again, where speech that's spontaneous starts getting quieter and directed towards the self more, and internalized speech is the basis of thought, of thinking, of self-regulating, talking to yourself and guiding your behavior to sit still and finish this so that you can learn the material or you can get the reward or whatever it might be. And again, what we have in individuals with impulse control deficits, including ADHD, and it mentions Tourette's in here as well. Very interesting. By about 7 to 9 years of age, when individuals are thinking, and there's all sorts of fancy electrodes and studies now, up until about 8 years old, if it's someone's thinking, a child's thinking, you can still sense, sometimes you can still see it, but sometimes the muscles still are operating in the jaw as if they're still talking to themselves. Until it really does, that doesn't fade away until age 9. And it fades away because these control centers of the brain are telling the motor part, stop moving, think about it first, then act. And that's, again, a natural development of the brain, is to go from just, if you have an impulse or a thought, you say it, to you think about it and then say it, to you reflect on it, to you say it to yourself, to you direct all these ideas internally. But literally the muscle movement is still going on up till about the age of 8 or 9. And then it's suppressed, except in kids with ADHD. So if you look at the brain development here, what are some things we're learning right away that are going to be practical tools? You want consequences that are far away in time or near in time?
Near.
So what does that mean? you have to do it more frequently. Now, how do I do it more frequently when I have 25 other kids in the room? We have to get to the practicals, right, of what's realistic. But if I want that child to be successful, he needs high frequency, immediate high frequency reinforcement. Now, it doesn't mean he needs candy droplets every 10 minutes. Although I've worked in some severely handicapped classrooms over the years where it does take that level of reinforcement pattern of something that matters to them to help guide them. But that's typically a much more severely multiply handicapped or autistic child where we're on that ratio, really. So for the kids with ADHD in your classrooms, we're not talking at that level. Typically. What's going to help them think through a problem or do their work? Movement and talking. Sit still and be quiet and focus. That doesn't make any brain sense. So, my colleague over here, we get the balls for them to sit on and roll around or do whatever it's going to take to stimulate and help them self-regulate. Okay? Stop that doodling and pay attention. Ask yourself, is doodling helping them pay attention or not? Doodling's not good or bad. Looking to the principal on that one. Is that doodling facilitating their pay attention and their creative process and their thinking or their listening? Or is it distracting them? Sometimes doodling is distracting. Sometimes doodling is organizing. So, when I get down to when we're all done, all this brain science stuff, which is past halfway through my hour, so we're going to get out of this to the practical stuff here pretty quickly. I want to sit and go, well, what should we do? Let's do what makes sense, but let's start with a basic understanding of some of these brain functions that can guide us on some basic things. So that, well, we don't allow headphones in it. Well, if headphones help the kid, listening to music helps, and that beat or rhythm helps the kid produce work or process information and produce work, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that? What are the complaints you or parents or other teachers might have about that? Why won't we do that?
Distraction for others.
It might be a distraction for others.
Or others wonder why they can't.
Right.
There you go. That's often the big one too, right? Both are absolutely true, right? And those are real issues. Remember, cost-benefit. There's no perfect solution. So don't give him the headphones so he's more off-task and disruptive to the other kids. Or give him the headphones so he's more focused and guess what? Less disruptive to the other kids. Now we still have this, but then why can't I? Why can't we? And by the way, usually I'm doing workshops ranting about, the evils of the cell phone and the plugged-in stuff and unplug your kids all the time. And now here I am advocating, music and headphones. It's kind of ironic. I'm advocating what works for a child and what makes sense. So we'll talk about keeping, once we have this basic understanding of how the brain develops and what the limitations are with ADHD, then we hopefully come to a place after a clearer awareness of acceptance and coming to a place of acceptance of the disability and keeping that in mind, again, leads us to what will work for the child. And I lost the point I was going to make about that, but it'll come back when it's ready. All right, stay tuned. Self-speech, right, talking. They need to talk out loud more to themselves. Oh, I know. Equal does not mean the same. You've heard that in other in-services. Hear it again today because I'm here to recharge your batteries and add to your toolkit and shine old tools that have been rusting on the bottom of your toolkit off and remind you how to go back out there and be more effective with these kiddos tomorrow. Okay, the other self-control, executive function, self-control of emotion. Again, we have automatic emotional signals coming up through the brain, but we have this ability again to, from top down, self-regulate or control them and say, wait, stop. And we have this ability to produce secondary emotions and to soothe ourselves or calm ourselves. Guess what? Kids with ADHD, that part of the executive functioning isn't working for them either. So they're often emotionally dysregulated. And that's really, if I said what's the main type of child or family or challenge that I work with, it's not ADHD, it's emotional dysregulation, of which I have many kids with ADHD or autistic spectrum or even OCD, under-controlled, over-controlled. We're having emotional regulation difficulties. And guess what? More and more in today's society, with the constant 24/7 demands of the information age, overwhelming, information overload, and emotional overwhelm. For every kid, every parent, and every teacher I know and work with. True or false? Right? We're all bombarded with this stuff. And in fact, another one of my sidebar comments is, and it gets to this diagnosis of ADHD, I believe we have societal ADD. We've all moved on this continuum over here to having less sustained attention, less abilities to focus for longer periods of time, less ability to sustain reflective thought and have that guide our behavior rationally. Just turn on any talk show, radio, or TV. We're going back down to this kind of conversation, the reptilian brain, rather than the mammalian brain, that's supposed to allow us this time for reflective thought before engaging in action. And the constant speed and being tethered to information all the time really has us all losing it. And still there are individuals on the continuum, on the bell-shaped curve, right, on the distribution, that are still at the far end of that. So as a society, it's getting harder and harder to get people to sustain their attention, especially to someone who's just talking at you for an hour like I'm doing. Absolutely terrible at modeling what I'm trying to tell you. All right? I figured you guys are hopefully, you know, left brain enough, and your teachers, you can handle this, you can listen for an hour. You know, as you know, I'm sure, again, in your other trainings and in-services and professional development, that's not going to cut it. We are not going to be able to keep relating to kids in the current and the next generation of kids coming up. Their brains are being wired differently, with or without ADHD, from a very early age. And I go to a lot of neuroscience conferences where this is, you know, this is the research that's most concerning to people right now. We can cover that again another day. But you know, 2- and 3-year-olds on iPads is changing how the brain is getting wired and developing. And this stuff is all the more true that we need to keep coaching and creating supportive environments that can empower our kids without, what do we say, enabling them. So we'll have to get to that. All right. And then problem solving. Again, this is where problem solving is based on playing with originally different physical things in your environment, literally moving them around and manipulating them. And you all know about your math curriculums with manipulatives, but it's not just math. It's learning, wiring the brain to learn anything works better with motion and hands-on experimentation before it then, as normal development, goes internal and mental and ideational. You with me? Okay. So guess what? Again, these kids have developmental lags and executive functions. Guess what? It's not coming online. They're not able to do the reflective ideational stuff as well as a general rule. Not that you can't find a kid who can't do this, but with ADHD, they again do much better with movement, with talking, with engaging, with focusing, with immediate reinforcements near in time. There. Now we have to figure out how do you actually do that as a classroom teacher. Right? All right. So we won't bother you with any other neuroscience gibberish today, other than to point out this slide, ADHD neuroanatomy. Some people think, oh, you know, this ADHD thing is just invented by psychologists, so they have a job. You know, it doesn't really exist. Well, we are able to show that, again, with modern brain scan technology, unfortunately, individuals with ADHD have 15% smaller, 25% less active, and 2 to 3 year lags in specifically the parts of the brain responsible for all those executive function, self-regulation things I just spent all this time talking about. Okay, it's not, and you know, and the kids I work with go, look, I'm not retarded, you know, and they feel like I'm not mentally retarded, and that's a, you know, a big fear for these kids. And we talk about, no, you're not. These parts of your brain, you're very capable at understanding and comprehending and even producing when under these circumstances. You do have difficulties and weaknesses in your ability to self-regulate and direct yourself to use those capacities. So just like visual nearsightedness, if someone has time nearsightedness, we can either say, look, I know you're not happy that you can't see very far, but you'll do better in life if you wear the glasses. And you may have a kid going, I don't want to wear the stupid glasses. And what do? We keep saying, come on, put on your glasses. Come on, put on your glasses. Why? So you can see better and function in the world. Until they can get over it and hopefully make a wise choice to use their resources to wear the visual glasses. So I talk a lot about, let's find the organizational glasses for these kids. What are the organizational eyeglasses or tools that we can find for these kids? Okay. The research, if you're still thinking, why be concerned about this? Left untreated, kids with ADHD do have much more difficulties in adulthood, adult lives. There's been a lot of longitudinal research that shows that these kids are at higher risk for all sorts of what you might think of if they're responding to the world impulsively. So again, you can read the details here. So let's get to treatment implications more specifically, what to do about it. Russell Barkley, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and he said it many years ago, but I still use it all the time. The problem here with ADHD, it's not a matter of knowing what to do. It's a matter of doing what you know. What are you supposed to be doing right now? Paying attention. What should you have done last night if you wanted to go out for recess? I should have done my homework. Now, you know you shouldn't have grabbed that on the playground. What should you have done instead? They can tell you it's not that they don't know what they're supposed to do. It's in the moment, it's not online. The connected circuitry isn't there for the knowledge part to apply it in real time and self-directed as much as other kids. So if we keep that in mind, then we understand that it's at the point of performance that we need to do our interventions. It's helping that child in the moment over and over and over, which is a particular challenge for us at times. So I've talked about this time blindness, and another metaphor I use in terms of helping you keep a disability perspective, another one I use with kids and families a lot, is it's not that you don't have the horsepower under the hood. It's that the control panel, the control instruments on the dashboard have some loose wires and aren't always working as consistently as we'd like them to. So we need to develop how you can better pay attention to how you are revving your engine and where and when you're slowing it down and able to regulate the horsepower that you have on your hood more effectively. So I want to take a look at that. And related to that is this concept of, and it's related to this idea of disability, what he's capable of. Every time I hear that, I cringe. So this is one of my going out on a limb and speaking to a group of teachers. Because it seems like one of your favorite things to say sometimes is, well, he's really capable. What comes after that? But. Well, guess what? Every single one of us is capable, but. It's the buts that we're trying to talk about. So rather than saying he's capable, but, what are some of the buts for ADD kids that usually finishes those sentences from parents or teachers or child? But he can't sit still.
He's not finishing this one.
But he won't finish the work. But he's off task. He could do it, but he won't. He chooses not to. I saw him do it the other day, so I know he can do it. You know, it's the ability to consistently and independently self-regulate. I said it's a faulty wire. It's not a completely disconnected wire. It's not online and available to consistently use all the time. That's what's so frustrating with these kids. So sometimes we talk about ADD being a variability disease. And these kids can perform well one day, but not the next. And you say, well, we hold it against them. If a major league pitcher pitches a perfect game, it's maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The next time they take the mound, and they don't do so well, we don't hold it against them and say, hey, you pitched a perfect game last week. You should be capable of it again this week. No, there's greater variability in these kids' performance. So appreciating that he's capable, but let's change that question to how is he capable? And you've heard this kind of stuff before in other contexts. Let's change it to when is he more capable and when is he less capable? So, somebody want to play with me for a minute, or a couple examples of kids with ADHD, particular real challenges you have in your classroom? Or think of ADHD kids you've had before. When are the kids with ADD perform better and when do they perform worse? Let's just think. Under what circumstances do they do their best, and under what circumstances do they do their worst? When are they more capable and less capable? Go ahead, shout it out.
I know after recess, they're usually, or some large movement tasks, they're usually performing better.
Okay, good, good.
And then after, like, maybe lunch is too overwhelming for them, and they're just, they need to come back and kind of self-regulate themselves. It's just too much for them.
All right. When there's too much stimulation and they're overwhelmed, or when there's not enough stimulation and they're underwhelmed. Yeah? What else? Anybody?
First thing in the morning.
Is when they're better.
Yeah. And the last hour of the day.
You bet. You bet. You bet. Good. What else? Common characteristics. Kids with ADHD.
Small group versus
Small group,
large
right?
group.
Right? Every one of you in this room knows these. I know that. Because I've sat in a million meetings with y'all. All right. What else? You know, including, you know, one-to-one, hands-on. Now, group hands-on projects, sometimes negotiating the social stuff adds a dimension that's a little more tricky. You know, supervised with attention, direction, you know, lecture, you know, interactive.
Visuals.
With visuals.
Long-term projects are the worst.
Short-term, absolutely small bites versus long-term projects. Absolutely right. So, after all is said and done, and we gave it some fancy words for different parts of the brain, what do you think Dr. Montminy might recommend that you should do with your kids' ADD?
Stop on the left.
Do more of this. do more of this. Medication, yes. Medication, the right medication for the properly diagnosed kid. Is ADHD overdiagnosed? Yes. Is it underdiagnosed? Yes. When it's accurately diagnosed, are meds good or bad? When it's accurately diagnosed and accurately treated with carefully monitored medication that helps the child by definition, you know, if you do it well, because guess what those medications do? Guess which part of the brain, and people often, you know, go sometimes, why would you give a stimulant to a hyperactive kid? Because most of the medications are in the stimulant class. Everyone knows that, right? Now there are non-stimulants that we give for certain reasons of side effects and personal interactions. Why would you give a stimulant to a hyperactive kid? What part of the brain do you think it stimulates? Yeah, the executive functions, the parts of the brain responsible for inhibiting impulses and sustaining attention. It stimulates specifically, they're designed to better stimulate those parts of the brain. Okay? So, for someone who has underactivity in those parts of the brain and therefore is acting out without inhibiting and reflective thinking and then acting, medication can help that and can increase their threshold. Medication alone typically is not as effective as providing behavioral interventions nonetheless. Okay? So what are your challenges in being able to do this? Yes?
I have a question about the worst column, because at some point in the real world, the kids are going to have to make a journey to be able to handle those kinds of things. So at some point, you need to, nobody's going to be making accommodations when they're out on the road. So as a parent, I kind of worry about that.
Couple thoughts, and excellent question again to your comment earlier too about the enabling possibility. When we educate the child, for them to be more self-aware that guess what, you work better under this circumstance and you struggle more under these circumstances. So then it behooves you, if you want to be happier, getting along better, doing better in life, when you can start learning how to, and by the way, we can use, you know, visual, especially visual checklists and to-dos. Guiding the process. Remember, they don't have a good working memory for keeping track of what they're doing while they're doing it. So we want to be coaching them and cueing them first with more external verbal reminders. Then we want to be providing visual reminders, little checklists, cue cards, notes to yourself, and empowering them to understand and to have the experience that when you use this, you do better. To catch them using this. First of all, we do it for them. Then we do it with them. Then we watch them do it with us. Then we let them do it. That's how you teach many of your academic skills. We're teaching them self-regulation, social emotional skills. So we lead when they can't do it independently. And then we do it side by side for a while. And then we hope we step back, they will choose to use it. Now some do. I work a lot with high school kids. I have a lot of kids coming back to me from years I've seen over the years from college who are still, some who are taking to using these little tools, and there are a million of them, whether it's little paper notepads or the electronic gadgets or apps nowadays. There are lots of self-organizing tools. Find the external visual tools that can help that child self-regulate. I keep looking at this clock to guide what I'm talking about through the hour to help keep track. Because I could literally talk about this for 5 straight hours and just have a blast doing it. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, which of the pieces can be useful to you in this hour. So that visual, I keep checking it. I have it up so you all can check it and pay attention too, and hopefully self-regulate. And then we have the audio to help. So we use these tools as one to help them meet the demands of their environment that may be out there, are likely to be out there for them. The other thing is to reconsider your assumption, though, that they will need to do all these things. Because guess what? Only in K through 12, in our American public school system, do they need to do all these things in the same way. What happens once you get out into the real world? Now let's start again with we all have strengths and weaknesses. If you're a successful, happy person, what do you do? What do you do? You migrate towards your strengths. And you don't get a job where your weaknesses are an Achilles heel and are hitting you in the face every day. So a lot of these kids can go have creative jobs or hands-on jobs, or jobs don't require sitting still and reflective thinking all the time, and be very successful. And they partner up or marry a spouse who can keep track of the checkbook. And, you know, and they're great entrepreneurs, and they have a secretary, an administrative assistant, who's the organized one. So and that's not shame on you, you didn't overcome your disability. It's good for you. You applied your strengths in life to be happy and successful, and you found ways to compensate for your weaknesses. Which of us, you know, doesn't... I know what my weaknesses are. I don't want to come to work every day with a boss who goes, you got to do your weakness. That's what these kids are doing every day with you. And until they graduate from high school, if they do, that's what they're facing. So you know, challenge you to think about that a little bit more, and try to teach them tools for managing it under situations where they do need to kind of use some of this as well. So I look at it both ways. Along those lines is explanations, not excuses. Right? This is really harder for you because you have ADHD, and I learned this part of your brain isn't working quite as well. So, okay, we'll excuse it. You know, again, no, it's so now that we understand that, we know you have to work a little differently to get where you need to go. So let's figure out how headphones make sense. Let's figure out how this little checklist on your desk makes sense. Let's figure out how a little watch with a beeper or your cell phone beeps at you at random intervals and says, where are your eyes? Paying attention. Are you on task? Because studies have shown little electronic aids, you put a little bug in the air, and for a half-hour work period, if you have at random intervals a little voice going, are you on task? What are you thinking about now? Focus on your work. It actually helps kids with ADHD do what? Focus on their work. And guess what? You don't have to be coming by every 30 seconds doing it. You can attend to your other kids. So Motivator, there are, you know, ADD Warehouse has lots of electronic aids along these lines, visual timers, audio coaching. Now, you may have a kid who's also oppositional and defiant, or who's depressed, or who's fed up with school, or who's, you know, language arts is in his thing anyway, whether he has ADD or not. So just putting a bug in his ear going, are you paying attention? I'm not naive. That doesn't solve all the problems. For some kids where they want to do better, but they cannot remember how to self-regulate, that might be the trick. So again, we want to sit down and practically think what makes sense. Well, where can we approximate, more? We need to, okay, understanding you do better in the mornings and you struggle to keep paying attention in the afternoon, I need to know that I'm using a teacher's assistant, or I'm using more proximity control, or I'm remembering to be more positive with the kid in the afternoon, or I'm using a buddy system, or I'm thinking about this adaptation or that more for the high-risk situations. And I'm empowering him to think about it too. So I'm not just doing for him. This is the way I keep wrestling with that enable versus empower. And making him more aware that if you think about these things too, you can be more successful. And always, 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 with the child and the parent and the teacher, I say, let's try it and see. Let's try it and see. Do you like when I always bug you and to remind you to get back in your seat and say, no, I don't, I hate you, you're mean. See, yeah, I don't like it either. Let's think. What can we do differently? Because what we need is you to be in your seat and hands to yourself, not flapping all over your neighbor. So, how can we do that? What will help you be able to do that? When can you do that better? When's it harder for you? What about that's hard for you to do? So, and then you work as a team, obviously, with support teachers, counselors, psychologists, whatever. You can't be a therapist to all 25 kids in the classroom. I know, I'm coming, Mom. All right. I have a few more minutes here to wrap up. I'm engaging the child to start thinking. At what age? At any age. I'm adjusting that conversation developmentally, but at any age. Okay? All right. Related to that is the universal tool, and to several of these questions, underneath your explanations, not excuses, of reflect and redirect. For almost any problem that you present to me, I will say, let's figure out how we can use reflect and redirect. Reflect the feeling or struggle. Reflect it back to the child. Empathically understand. I understand it's a struggle for you to sit still right now. I understand it's hard to keep reading all these words and they get jumbled from the page. And we need to get through this chapter quietly. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. Or this activity quietly or cooperatively or whatever it is. And we define what the expectation is. And in this way, again, we are empathically relating and reflecting back to the child what their struggle is. Whether or not it's the disability or their personality, or their learned behavior, or that's not how mom does it at home. So, okay, I understand. You had a rough, again, I treat kids with all types of emotional life challenges, not just kids with ADHD. And for everyone, whether it's, I understand you're having a tough time focusing on your work today because you heard a really bad fight between mom and dad last night. Or I understand you're having a hard time focusing on your work today because you didn't take your medicine and your ADD's, getting in. Either way, I understand your struggle is blank. And I'm going to redirect you to your behavioral choices. And now we need to figure out what to do about it. So what would help you be able today? Would it help you to sit in the corner more or to sit next to read silently or to read with a buddy partner? To work on this worksheet in this way or that way? Let's try it and see. You can't go wrong with that. You're joining the child in problem solving, you're guiding them, and in that way you're providing both the supportive safety net and empowering them to be an active agent in their own learning and in their own self-control, self-regulation. You're not butting up against them. So, reflect their feelings, whatever the problem is, pause long enough that you can reflect what's going on for this kiddo. Try to share that with the child and then redirect them to some choices and say, let's try it and see how that works. And then keep the feedback loop up. At the end of that period, go, let's think. Hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do you think you did on finishing that project out? All right? You put your self-rating behind your back, and I'll put my rating for you behind the back. And then 1, 2, 3, we'll shoot, and we'll see. And we get the kid to match self-evaluation. That self-monitoring thing, self-evaluate how he did compared to the teacher. Kid always pulls out a thumb looking like this, and you've got him like this. That's a conversation to have. We try to see, how did that work for you? I thought it did this. I'm thinking this, and here's why. Let's talk about it. Oh, and we keep working that together. And I'm not going, you know, in your face, putting the kid down. I'm going, dude, this is what I saw, and this is why. So let's think about what you're going to do with that. Now, if a kid's particularly sensitive and critical, and he doesn't like a thumb in his face, then we try something else. All right? Corrective feedback. Corrective feedback. It's not just about M&Ms. Consequences aren't just M&Ms. Corrective feedback that's constructive and helpful. Immediate and frequent. But I don't have time. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'd rather see you taking 20 seconds of preventative or early intervention with that high maintenance kid a half dozen times a day, take 30 seconds a handful of times a day, then need to take 30 minutes of cleaning up the meltdown tantrum that he has that disrupts your whole classroom much more, right? So which is it? So these are ways. So we can give them this feedback with our reflect and redirect. And the simplest way for that is to think of the phrase yes and. This is my big thing these days, so I'll wrap up with this one and we'll take final questions. Give me any type of problem a kid may be having in your classroom right now. ADD, impulsive behavior. Give me another example again.
Staying in the seat.
Yes, I understand you're antsy right now, and you have to find a way to sit quietly. So let's see if you're going to do that on this chair or on the floor. What else?
Calling out.
Yes, I understand you're excited to give me your answer. And remember, hand first. So, hand in the air, hand over the mouth. Let's try it. Let's all try it. Now, I have to be careful I'm not embarrassing or ridiculing the kid. So I have to decide, you know, it's playful, it's humor. So I have to decide, is that kid going to find that funny? Or he's going to, you know, start like sticking a finger up his nose or something, right? I get him to. So, yes, I understand you have that answer, and I can't hear you when you don't raise your hand first. You do stuff like that anyway, I'm sure. But it's just I'm reminding you again of the things that will. What will this kid? But he has ADHD. How do I treat him? You don't treat him differently. See, equal doesn't mean the same. I don't make everyone in the classroom wear eyeglasses because some kids are nearsighted. Why do some kids have eyeglasses and some don't? Because some need them and some don't. Why do some kids have headphones and listen to music and some don't? Because some need it to be quieter and focus on their work better and some don't. Why does that kid have a sticker chart and I don't? Because it helps him do something and that he needs that right now and you don't. And it's in the culture of celebrating diversity and strengths and weaknesses and differences, and you're applying it beyond just, you know, a Martin Luther King Day lecture. Right? This is another type of diversity issue that's very serious, that we have a full range of strengths and weaknesses and differences, and we're going to celebrate them all. Right? Okay. Questions?